Looks like we've got a quorum, so we'll get started. So first of all, welcome to today's webinar, which we call Making Global Payroll Plug and Play. Thank you for taking time out of your undoubtedly busy schedules. My name is Mark Oliver Fiedler. I'm together with Trevor, founder of Payzaar. I'm the CEO of the company. We'll tell you a bit more about Payzaar throughout the session here today. I'm happy and excited that Trevor is joining me in today's webinar session. Trevor is, as I mentioned, the co-founder and our COO. And together we have quite a bit of experience working in the global HR and payroll space for the last 15, 20 years. And what we wanted to do in today's session is share with you some thoughts and perspective on how transformation and operational improvements in a global payroll context, how we believe they can and should evolve from kind of some of the more traditional approaches. Before we jump in, just a few quick housekeeping items. We have switched the lines. Everyone here is on mute. If you do have questions, then please ask them in the chat or in the Q&A that you should see at the bottom of the screen. Someone from our team will try to answer the question either directly live in the Q&A box, or we will get to them after we're done with the presentation. Presentation should take probably about 40-45 minutes, and then the idea is to leave some time at the end for Q&A, for us to address questions either that we pick up along the way or people ask at the end of the session. This session is being recorded, so we will share the recording within the next couple of days for anyone who is registered on this webinar. So with that out of the way, let's jump right in and talk a bit about what we want to cover in today's webinar. Quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk a bit about kind of where we're finding ourselves with payroll in a global context and what some of the challenges are, the inherent challenges of running payroll in a multi-country environment. And then we'll talk about how that sort of lines up against the organizational needs and wants of a typical multinational business. What you who might be running a multi-country payroll function, what ideally you would like to have at your disposal, how you would like to operate. And that will then bring us into talking a bit more specifically about plug and play or platform as a service solutions, which Payzaar is a pioneer of those kind of solutions. And I think it's very important for the broader payroll community to understand and reflect on how those plug and play platform as a service solutions can address some of the traditional challenges that the industry has been facing. We'll then take a look at a couple practical examples, some of our real customer success stories, and we'll wrap it up talking about how you can then apply such a model and what that means from an implementation perspective. Okay, so that's the outline for the next 40 minutes or so. Let's talk about global payroll and what typically the solution in global payroll environment is. And I see that the formatting here has played a little trick on us, so apologies for that. Somehow the little bullet here in the middle has moved. But what this slide was supposed to say is it's supposed to highlight the fact that in a typical multinational organization, payroll tends to be very fragmented. A survey of one of the global payroll leaders, a recent survey, has highlighted that the average multinational company has 30 different payroll systems or providers in use. Now that fragmentation is in a way, it's not surprising. You know, anyone who's worked in global payroll knows that you know, typically each country, each jurisdiction has very specific labor laws and taxation laws and social security systems that require very specific knowledge and very specific systems to make sure that payroll is processed in compliance with local laws and legislation. And so that's why when you start operating across borders, you will almost inherently end up having to work with lots of different local systems. Even the big global payroll players that have been building global payroll solutions for decades all operate with you know, specific local payroll solutions. So there's no single global payroll calculation platform that can process payroll in every single country. So what that means then is that you end up having different systems, and that ultimately translates into fragmentation from a process perspective. So each system will be designed and set up slightly differently, how it consumes information, how it imports information. The data itself will be organized in different ways, structured in different ways, different formats that you work with. And so that fragmentation then ultimately you know, becomes quite challenging to manage by the time you're running payroll across 20, 30, 40 different countries. You're basically working in a very complex environment. Graphically represented here as this kind of spaghetti image where, you know, you have payrolls running across different countries, but no country resembles another, right? Each country has its unique, different local operating procedures, processes, data silos that they work in, different ways of how information is communicated from HR into payroll, from payroll back out to finance, from payroll to the employee in form of pay slips and other tax-related documents. So it becomes very quickly, without proper you know, coordination and standardization, it becomes a big hodgepodge mess to work in. And I'm sure some of the folks here on the phone are in the middle of this and experiencing this sort of fragmentation and silos in their day-to-day operations, right? So I'll let Trevor talk a bit about you know, how ideally payroll professionals would like to manage their payroll environment and what some of the key objectives are that, you know, ideally we would like to be able to achieve when we're managing payroll in a multi-country environment.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I think Mark has done a fairly good job on describing what the challenge is facing people operating in a multi-country or global payroll environment. And in preparing for this, Sam, who runs our marketing team, found this post on LinkedIn the other day, and I thought it was very interesting. He shared it with me. And there's something really interesting about this, which is, on one level, we're kind of looking at this data, and I said, whoa, reporting doesn't seem to be very interesting to people. Until I looked at the numbers here a little bit. And we can see in this little pulse survey from one of the traditional payroll vendors that people are still grappling with basic stuff like outdated software and process and integration and moving their data around the place. So 80% of people's time is in blocking and tackling. And because so much time and things are so fragmented and disjointed, no wonder there's a major lack of accuracy highlighted on this. And I think there was something like 270, 280 people responded to this little pulse survey. And then if I was kind of further think about what the future or, you know, could be for global payroll, you know, the insights that we derive from good data in one place and nice standardized solutions across my global payroll footprint, the emphasis on reporting is really, really low. And I think that there's an awful lot of value in the data that the global payroll professional should have easily and accessible at their fingertips. So I think I think if we think back to the tangle that Mark described, there's an awful lot of effort. If you think about the effort that goes into straightening out data just to get people paid, and I'm not talking about anything else, just to get people paid as accurately as possible and on time, no wonder people aren't getting to lift their heads and to do maybe some more interesting work. So I just thought with that little factoid, we'd say it's not just the Payzaar folks talking about our perception of the challenge of global payroll. I think just in the last couple of days, this popped into Sam's feed, and I thought it was topical. So if we can move forward, then we start to think about what our global objective should be. And it goes without saying that accurate and on-time payroll for all employees is the objective. That's without doubt, that's a hygiene factor, that's just must have. And that's a key focus of what people in a global payroll role should be up to. But to achieve that, then we like to think about things maybe just a little bit differently. Like, how can we move forward to that unified process? So when we talk about multi-country payroll or global payroll, we need to recognize that there has to be some flexibility to cope with local nuance. But ultimately, you want repeatable operational control in a unified process across your global footprint so that things operate predictably. They're controlled, under control, and you have good visibility on what's going on in your payroll footprint. Your data should be available to hand, right? So that you can start to answer just the basic blocking and tackling information requests from around the business, from your colleagues in finance, HR, and senior management teams in local operating companies in your footprint. So having that instantly available to be able to support your colleagues is important. And of course, not just compliance and keeping the organization whole from a statutory perspective, but also putting in place the controls and governance around how payroll is executed in the business, looking at contracts of employment, terms and conditions, reviewing those, making sure that they're still, if they haven't been looked at in some time, that they are still compliant from a local legislative perspective, so that anyone that wants to put some new terms and conditions into an employment contract in the organization also funnels it through the governance part of global payroll. So I kind of see a hierarchy here of, the basic building block, get people paid, then move to more controlled, repeatable operational processes. Because if they're standardized, you can optimize and improve them. Better data, better insights, compliance, and governance. But there's a couple of other areas I'd really like to drill into on this slide. And if we think about the impact of all of this industry of checking and data validation and data preparation, if we think about the repetitive work that our colleagues do in making sure people are paid right on time. So let's go back to the tangle that Mark showed earlier on in one of the earlier slides. Let's look at that little pulse survey and what people are trying to deal with. And the payroll teams in the global payroll organization are moving heaven and earth to get people paid on time, confronted by a whole host of different systems, a whole host of different payroll providers, and they're trying to transform that data, often manually, and augmenting this data manually to try and move it to where it needs to get to calculate people's payroll. And an awful lot of that effort is grind. An awful lot of that effort is very manual. And we should really be thinking about how do we eliminate that? Because, if I think about this kind of work, and if anyone I speak to, any of our clients or prospects that we're engaged with, invariably it comes up, Trevor, do you know somebody that could help us? We're recruiting into our global payroll teams. So by reducing that repetitive work, helps you to, obviously make the role more attractive for people to join and retain staff. So I think there's a really big issue here, not just that, you should be thinking about improving your operations for operations' sake, but also for your colleagues that are working in this space. And then if we take that one step further, start thinking about your key person dependency risks and how can you retain your colleagues. So getting to a better place for global payroll, I think, has not just an optimization piece, but a very human piece as well that we need to think about. And of course, the organizational context. Businesses are moving at increased cycle times, more corporate actions, acquisitions, disposals, opening up offices, internationalizing far earlier in their history than they would have before. And I think putting yourself into a position to be able to support the organization is really, really important. Otherwise, you're back on the back foot. Now, if you don't have an agile global payroll operating environment, even if you straighten out what you have today, next thing you know, next year you're dealing with another half dozen countries, more terms and conditions of employment. If you don't have something that's agile and flexible and responsive to the needs of organization, you're going to end up back at that slide that Mark showed in the beginning with a tangle of new systems. So it's a really interesting place to be at the moment when we think about what could be possible, but also having that time to lift your heads up from that tangle to think about could there be a better future. So maybe we'll flip forward from there, Mark. There is a challenge, right? So the challenge we have is, historically this has been a tough problem to solve, moving to a global payroll model, because there's a couple of reasons. There's some problems within your own organization or challenges within your own organization to make change. And then the traditional solutions that have been provided by the global payroll providers today also make that change tough. Right. So if we think about some of those issues for a moment and talk about those and talk about your fragmented environment. On one side of the equation, you have a host of different systems that are storing your data that can impact payroll. Your core HR systems, benefit systems, local benefit systems, commission information, time and attendance. There's a whole host of data sources, equity systems, right? So you have to try and put manners on your organization in some way to get that data to flow. And organizations now have pretty low patience for long-running projects. They want to see high impact. They want to see results quickly. And what's in the market today from your traditional global payroll providers, they're just slow to implement. They're very, very costly. And the risk is very high. Disruption is very high because, the model is all about rip and replace. So how do you manage your objectives? How do you move from my global payroll objectives to a much better place, given that there's some snags with what's available from the traditional payroll providers to move you to that centralized, standardized type platform? So what I was going to do is I was going to move on then to the next slide. I think hand back over to Mark to maybe just talk about some of these issues in terms of how technology can help us move to those places. Sure.
Thanks, Trevor. So yeah, look, I mean, I think as Trevor described, right, the challenges are obvious in order to bring some of the improvements, some of the automation optimization into a global payroll environment, especially when when you're thinking about moving down sort of the traditional path of replacing your entire existing payroll vendor network. But what we see and what we believe in is that you can achieve a lot of the improvements and arrive at a lot of the objectives that we talked about a bit earlier by applying smart modern technology and without having to go through that big disruption of changing out your entire local or regional payroll infrastructure and vendor environment or system environment. So three key concepts that we introduce and apply with customers that we're working with. Number one starts with helping our clients to drive standardization and consistent operating practices into their payroll environment. Even though we always like to focus on, the complexities and the differences that, undoubtedly exist across different countries based on the different laws and legislations that we talked about, fundamentally, running a payroll process, if you kind of take a step back and think about it in more fundamental conceptual terms of what needs to happen in order to process payroll, the different process steps are actually very, very similar. Whether I run a payroll in Ireland or in Spain or in the US or in China, the different steps and stages that need to take place, collecting my data inputs, structuring the data inputs so that they can be well understood within the local payroll calculation system, having then the outputs that come back from the local payroll system prepared and organized in a way where it's easy for me and my team to validate the results that were generated against my inputs that I've submitted, against previous pay cycles that have been calculated, how I'm effectively able to distribute the documents that come with the payroll process, the pay slips, the statutory filings, the reports that need to be shared with finance, HR, and other teams. All these things, all these fundamental requirements of operating a good, healthy, effective payroll function are actually quite consistent, quite common across different jurisdictions. So the first step we start to look at is how can we help to standardize, that tangle that we looked at, everyone running processes somewhat differently, having different data structures. And this is where technology can be tremendously helpful. Because once you start to put technology around this sort of process structure and data structure, the technology starts to drive and gives you sort of a template for standardizing processes that maybe, organically, historically have grown kind of into different directions, but with technology can start to bring them back together and start to align them and standardize them and create a much more homogeneous, as we like to say, local environment, because there will still be certain local differences, but all the things that are sort of common and should be structured in a more consistent global manner, technology is a great facilitator and catalyst to do that, right?
So it's an interesting point, Mark, because we think about this often and we speak about it often when we're on webinars like this. We think of it from the customer perspective, but there's huge benefits to standardization as well on the provider side, because ultimately on the provider side, if they're getting better data flows in a more predictable format, it just gives them a much better chance to prepare payroll based on your inputs with higher degrees of accuracy. So providers in this model as well really do benefit from that standardization. And if we go back to the objectives for a moment, and I'm just going to close on this point. If we want to improve, if we want to achieve our objectives, we have to create some sort of a benchmark from which we can measure, right? And someone once said to me, a former boss of mine said, if you can't measure it, or if you don't measure it, it can't be important. So you got to get yourself to a position that your payroll processes and elements of your payroll processes are measurable, because only from that benchmark then you can start to understand really what's going on, what the opportunities are for improvement, and how do you actually execute on those.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, the other key reason why a standardized environment is so crucial as a starting point is unless you have standardized, consistent, streamlined processes, it becomes virtually impossible also to get to that automation, right? Which is what the survey talked about. People want to start working in a less manual manner, but if you have different procedures and processes across your international footprint, you can't introduce smart automation tools, or you have to rely on building out automation tools for each and every single country, and that becomes very time consuming and challenging and resource consuming. So standardization, first very important concept of a plug and play platform as a service approach. Second important point is interoperability, right? You heard Trevor talk about the fact that the idea of replacing all your existing local payroll solutions should be a very daunting endeavor, right? Because it's time consuming, it's quite risky. If you have a well-oiled, well-running local payroll process, most payroll professionals don't want to mess with that, right? And why should they? But the point then is, if we want to bring more standardization and automation into this local environment, how can we do that? By basically bringing the technology and bringing the harmonization, layering that on top of what already exists. And that requires interoperability, right? And that's how modern PaaS solutions like Payzaar are built. Our platform is extremely flexible, configurable to integrate and operate with any local payroll system, whether it's an on-premise internal system that your own team is operating in, or whether it's a local payroll provider. So that's a very important concept to apply to the solution framework. And then the third important point is modularity, right? So, and this goes back to the point about the risk of implementation that we talked about. So if you're now starting to change out every piece of process, local infrastructure system, that creates a lot of disruption, and with that disruption, a lot of risk of the implementation stalling or failing somewhere along the way. So our approach is, let's focus on the objectives that are most crucial, and pick those off in a very focused and targeted manner. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But for example, we have certain clients that their key challenge might be that data consolidation and reporting, and getting the data integrated with their finance system. So we can help to create, without taking apart your local payroll systems, your local payroll processes, changing ownership models and so on, we can help to consolidate all your data in one place and give you great, powerful automated reporting, while basically keeping all your existing structures and tools in place.
It's a key point, really, that because what you can do, especially in an organizational context with short cycle times and low patience for really long running traditional implementations, is demonstrate results fast, relieve pain points, create pain relievers and gain creators, so you can demonstrate that progress, but do it quickly, because the organization is patient. And I think now tools like ours are emerging that enable that speed, enable that agility.
Yeah, and I think historically the sort of, let's work on something that's manageable would have been structured along sort of regional scope, right? Hey, let's start with a few countries first and start to roll those into a standardized model. And that's one way to get a foot in the door, get going. But in many scenarios that we're seeing with clients, and the data scenarios, one that certainly would apply here. If you now optimize out of your 50 countries, you start standardizing 5 of those, you still have the other 45 that are sort of running in that tangled manner. And so what our solution model allows you to do is to kind of horizontally start to create improvements and automation and consistency across all your different countries, but picking off specific parts of your overall operating model, right? Whether that's reporting, whether that's your integration between your HR systems and your local payroll systems, whether that's your distribution of documents and pay slips to your employees. You can have very specific modular solutions that you implement in a consistent manner across your countries without having to change out everything that's going on in your payroll environment, right? So that's a very, very big conceptual advantage over the traditional solutions. So let's move forward. And Trevor, I don't know if you want to maybe pick this up and talk a bit about, you know, where that brings us then, this concept of standardization, interoperability, and modularization, and how that all comes together.
Yeah, so I suppose we're introducing this concept of a global payroll pass, so called a platform as a service. So that platform of as a service has a number of different elements that allow us to achieve some of the items Mark just spoken about, that different modules can be deployed selectively based on the market that you're trying to serve, based on the particular organizational or global payroll pain point, to deliver a much more better structured outcome for the organization. So what does a pass need to do? Well, it needs to support collaboration between the different actors in the payroll process. So think about people upstream from payroll, generating payroll change data and housing that data in systems, or a lot of time not in systems, but in spreadsheets or in emails upstream from you, right? So it'll allow upstream collaboration with actors and people and systems, and downstream collaboration with your payroll providers. So where everything is transparent, we're achieving this automated environment, this operational control workflow, where your local payroll providers, your shared services team, or your regional teams can view the payroll process. Your local teams are involved, and then you know, your colleagues in HR or sales operations or other places that are feeding you data. Data preparation is kind of that key piece. So how do we take our disparate data sources, take data from it, and make sure that we have the right inputs for the right payroll provider in the right market? How do we map and transform that data to take much of this industry of checking and data preparation that's going on within the payroll community away, right? So when we talk about automation, we also need to recognize that we're not talking about straight through processing all of the time, right? And I hear a lot of people talking about touchless payroll. And I think a lot of the principles behind that are, there's a lot of merit in that. However, most payroll professionals I talk with say, well, I want to make sure I eyeball that data before it goes to my provider. I want to make sure we apply the 4i check at the point that payroll is prepared prior to approval. And I also want to make sure that before the payroll data is posted to the finance systems through the GL, that we make sure things balance there, because it just generates downstream problems. So a lot of that automation allows people, maybe reduces the amount of checking, reduces the amount of data entry, but gives the payroll professional the right checkpoint at the right time to make sure that the process flows correctly. Of course, back to the modularity of this system, you know, the whole data analytics piece in certain territories, they might not be ready just yet to absorb that region or those territories or countries into your shared service model for global payroll. However, you might just want to apply reporting and analytics over the top of that country, and that's a pretty low touch way, again, of getting relieving some pain around reporting, creating some gains around analytics and insights with low disruption. So you can selectively deploy that through the application. So really what the pass is a central hub to drive the collaboration, provide those tools to you to selectively deploy. And we like to think about doing this in a no-code way. All right. So this is all configuration. This isn't like the old ERP implementations of the past, where to achieve this, you need a legion of consultants in for 2 years to turn your business upside down and make your business operate as their software has determined, and leave you with a very large invoice. We like to do this, and part of that platform as a service is to give you the tools to be able to operate this on a no-code basis. This is configuration operable by payroll, finance, HR professionals to be able to respond to the dynamic needs of the organization. Because guess what? You're going to have a new country that you're going to need to sort out tomorrow. You're going to have a new system as a source of an additional benefit that's rolling down the tracks. So you need to be able to absorb these changes into the model. And that's where the past really helps.
Perfect. I see I'm muted myself and couldn't get off mute. Yeah, look, so I think the picture says it, right? So, you know, the tangles that we saw before, you know, by applying a consistent model over the top of those local payroll solutions, it's not like you will no longer need local payroll experts and local payroll solutions for sure. Those are still in the picture. Hence we see those, you know, lines running out of the countries into the past platform. But all that wobbliness and sort of fragmentation and, you know, all the heterogeneous structures in a past model are being abstracted and standardized and harmonized. And I think that's where, you know, we see with clients that we're implementing the solution for, we're seeing the real benefits. And it means that there's less, with this model, there's less reliance on the improvements being generated out of the local environment, right? You might have certain countries where, you know, you only have small populations, you know, someone maybe processing payroll within your team sort of on the side next to other responsibilities. You might have a fairly small local payroll partner that you've contracted with, and expecting within that sort of setup to achieve big optimizations in terms of automation and data integration, all those kind of very important things. It's really not realistic and reasonable, right, to expect those kind of improvements to happen out of the local country level. And that's why a platform as a service solution that can be deployed and integrated across these countries, as Trevor said, without, you know, huge amounts of kind of custom coding. It's all basically, you know, designed to be plug and play. Is an absolute crucial way of how you can improve your payroll environment. So, but rather talking about it in just abstract terms, it's always helpful and interesting to look at it, how that actually comes to fruition, how that actually works, by looking at it at a few real life customer examples. So let's talk about some of our own experiences working with clients that you know, started with a fragmented environment, like some of you might be operating in right now, had the goal, the objective to standardize and streamline, and how we have been able to help them achieve that. So Blue Prism is a great example. It's one of the leading companies in robotic process automation. They've been growing tremendously over the last few years. You know, big technology company in their own right. And when we started working with them, they were on their growth trajectory. They had employees across 12 countries or so at the time. There were about 900 to 1,000 employees. And they had that sort of very diversified mix of different local payroll operations that they had in place. In some countries, they were processing payroll in-house very consciously, not sort of by necessity, but they wanted to have full control and run the payroll in-house. And then in other parts of their payroll, in other parts of their operating environment, they decided to outsource payroll simply because they didn't have the in-house expertise and resources. So they had this sort of classic hybrid setup of in-house and external payrolls. They wanted to consolidate and standardize, streamline their payroll operations, looked at the traditional aggregator solutions, and quickly came to realize that those traditional models really are not designed to help them operate in that hybrid setup. So in that case, if they had decided to work with one of the aggregators, they would have had to essentially outsource all of their payroll operations to that aggregator partner, which was not really what they were interested in doing. They also felt that there was a lot of rigidity in the way that the aggregators expected them to align with their operating model. That wasn't really conducive to their way of working. And some of the fundamental challenges that they were grappling with was lack of data transparency, lack of visibility into how the local payroll processes were being executed, lack of central governance. And so that's when they turned to us. And what we ended up doing with Blue Prism is we helped them implement our PaaS solution across their existing in-house and outsourced payroll solutions. We, by doing that, helped them to consolidate all their processes and data in one central standard platform. We automated a lot of the reporting that previously would have taken hundreds of hours, which they're now able to run with just a few clicks. And all of this was rolled out across, to start with, the 12 countries in less than 3 weeks. So it also shows you, the effectiveness and the speed to, come to the optimization and achieving your objectives. Speed to time to value is dramatically different from the traditional kind of rip and replace model. And so, you see the quote here from Stuart, who at the time was a global payroll manager. Really, that standardization and helping to structure the processes and workflow in a consistent manner, helping to align and segregate the roles and the duties in the payroll process, having everything fully auditable, was a huge step forward, and also helped them, back to Trevor's point, it's not just for the customer organization big improvement, it also helped them to establish better relationships with their local in-country payroll partners as well. So I think this is a very nice example and success story of how, without having to take apart all your existing payroll solutions and infrastructure, we've been able, with Blue Prism, to create huge optimization improvement in their payroll environment.
Just a quick question for you, Mark, on that one. Who did most of the heavy lifting on this in terms of the implementation and rollout?
Well, you know who did most of the heavy lifting. The way we implemented this and the way we implement almost all of our projects with our customers is through what we call a self-enablement approach, which means we basically have a train-the-trainer model, right? We train the customer, some core team members within the customer organization, how to set up the platform, how to configure the system, how to maintain the system on an ongoing basis. For example, how to set up a new country, how to set up a new report, how to add new pay elements, how to assign new access rights to new users, and so on. So it's very self-serviceable. And in this case, Stuart and his team, after I think we did a training for 3-4 days, where we showed them how to work with the platform. And after that, those 3 weeks that I mentioned, the rollout across those 12 countries was entirely done by Stuart and his team on their own. So obviously we have a team of professionals on the Payzaar side who are there to help when needed and answer questions and guide you along the way if something comes up in the implementation. But our whole philosophy and the platform is designed in such a way that it's entirely self-serviceable for the customer organization. And just on that point, I think the other example that we'd like to highlight is a company called Fagron, pharmaceutical company based out of headquartered in the Netherlands, across approximately 25-30 different countries with about 4,500 employees. So a bit bigger than Blue Prism. And in their situation, they had absolutely no consistency in their processes and workflows in each of the countries. Payrolls run differently, not just in terms of the process models, but even who was owning payroll was very different from country to country. In certain places was HR, another place was finance. So naturally, with payroll not even being owned by the same function, there was a lot of heterogeneous structures that had established itself. There was no global reporting, no visibility into the data, so no consolidated reporting. And the reason Fagron's global HR and finance leadership team ultimately was looking for a solution, a past solution, was that there was absolutely no appetite to rip and replace all their existing local payrolls due to time constraints, due to lack of resources to go through that big upheaval process and change out everything, and also just a desire to achieve results quickly and not run the risk of getting stuck in a big hairy implementation. So what we've done for Fagron, we have again rolled out our cloud-based platform and connected up the local payrolls in our central standardized platform. So all the processes have now become consistently aligned with each other. All the data that comes out of the local payroll systems is being fed into our central reporting dashboards. And just like with Blue Prism, this solution has been rolled out very rapidly across the existing in-country payroll partners, and so much lower cost of implementation, much shorter turnaround time to get to the results. And I think Celine, the head of HR, really said it with her quote that the idea, the concept of being able to improve and achieve these objectives of standardizing, streamlining, automating their payroll processes and operations on top of the existing systems and partners was one of the key selling points why they chose Payzaar and this platform as a service model. So those are just two examples. There's a lot more. You can find some more on our website, or you can reach out to us if you're interested in learning about how other companies have adopted this plug and play platform as a service solution. To wrap up, I think it'd be good to talk maybe a bit about what that means. It all sounds great, right? We've shown you some examples how companies that may be similar to yours have adopted this plug and play solution approach. I'll let Trevor talk a bit if you're interested in getting further into this. What does this actually mean from an implementation perspective, and what's special about this approach as you're thinking about how to roll this out within your own organization?
I suppose the key thing is you've got to remember you've got a business case approved. Eyes are now on you to deliver on those global payroll objectives. So you need to deliver something quick, right? So anything that's going to be slow and expensive is going to turn off the management team, purely and simply because there's lots of competing initiatives in the organization. So with our configurable approach, with our self-serviceable approach that Mark has touched on, it doesn't have to be slow, it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be risky, right? So you're not to achieve fantastic results in short period of time. You don't have to pull apart your payroll organization by the roots, because often what you need to do is you need to get that global visibility on your processes, on your data, and on your operations to demonstrate results very quickly. I met a company a couple of years ago, and essentially what they'd done is they'd moved to a shared service center, and they were calling it Global Payroll. But all of the folks they had working in that shared service center were still operating in the local payroll tools that organization had. So they didn't really, all they did was transfer the problem. They transferred the problem from a local market to a shared service center without actually attending to improving the process, achieving standardization, connecting their data. And they generated some incredible risks because now they were in a market far away from where payroll was being run, trying to find in-house payroll experts in that country. So for me, think about speed, think about that top level standardization piece, because from that benchmark you can then measure, refine, and improve. Connect your data. Self-enablement then. If organizations are impatient with slow and expensive implementation projects, the pace of change in the organization at the same time is also increasing. So having something that's agile and flexible, that supports your organization's ambitions to expand internationally, etc., is just a really powerful thing to have at your disposal, because you're going to wake up tomorrow, there's some expansion has landed on your desk, or your company is in growth mode and they've just done an acquisition, and now you're trying to sort out global payroll in another 15 countries. So something that something that's flexible, that you can take charge of yourself, that you can anticipate and respond to how the organization needs global payroll to work, not just today, but post-acquisition and 3 years from now. Having something flexible in your hands is really, really important. And it just drives down the overall cost of ownership for you, right? You're not beholden to the vendor. Like, for small changes, you're not being charged for small changes. You don't have to get in a queue to wait for 6 months to get somebody to write you a report. You can get that yourself through platforms like ours. I know, for instance, that I often hear about implementation backlogs, or where customers sign an agreement to move their global payroll processes, but they're in these kind of implementation queues where it just takes ages even to get to the start gate with that vendor to start their global payroll project. That doesn't have to be the case anymore. The world doesn't operate like that anymore. Your companies and organizations are moving way faster than that. So why not take a tool into your payroll environment? That gives you a lot of those benefits.
Perfect. All right. I think all great. Great observations, Trevor. So I think that brings us to the end of our prepared remarks here for today's session, at least. So at this point, we would like to open it up to your questions or comments on what we just discussed, what we shared with you, and you can either, I guess, if you have a question, just post it in the Q&A tab or button at the bottom, and we'll read them out and try to answer them as they come in. And I see that there is already a couple that we have picked up here along the way. So let me read it out, and then we'll see whether we can give some answers to these. So first question is, what if a company decides on integrating all of the payroll in a unique ERP? How could Payzaar help? So I suppose the way I understand this question is, if a company adopted a single ERP solution, which in my experience, I can only think about, maybe 2 or 3 that would actually be able to support payroll across a truly global footprint. So I guess my perspective on that would be a couple things. First of all, I would ask the question, why would you want to do that? Back to what Trevor was just talking about in terms of the complexity and length and the risk involved in that sort of implementation process. But if you were, let's say you already have implemented a global payroll solution across your different countries, then ultimately I think it depends on what you're doing with that global payroll solution. At the moment, what we see is that in many of those scenarios, there's still lots of gaps that exist, for example, from a data aggregation reporting perspective. So even if it's called one global ERP solution, you might not be able to get all your data consistently aggregated and consolidated. You might still have typically challenges to integrate that solution with your other systems, i.e. your HR, your benefit, your accounting systems. And that's where Payzaar can absolutely help you, even if you do have an ERP solution that you've rolled out as a global payroll platform. Trevor, anything you want to add on that question, or should we move on to?
Yeah, there might be just a different dimension to it, Mark, which is, in terms of the question. Well, look, you have potentially lots of different payrolls that aren't in that ERP solution. If I think about getting data back in, we can help you pull data from other local payroll systems, because often there's a long tail in global payroll as well that doesn't really sit comfortably in the global payroll, in the traditional global payroll type model. So that's a kind of a data transformation and integration piece that we can absolutely help you with as well, to format that data, get it into your ERP from a general ledger journal entry integration perspective.
Okay, let's go to another question, which is maybe in some ways related. Does this PaaS model work with aggregators? Can it integrate with the aggregators too? Trevor, you want to start on that one? Sure.
Yeah. So from an aggregator perspective, again, you got to take a look at if you're. Well, I suppose a little statistic on that one. I think something like 15 to 20% of companies that operate a global payroll model have actually end-to-end integrated across their entire payroll landscape. A couple of reasons for that. One is it's hard. Two is the global aggregators aren't particularly interested in the long tail of smaller populations. But as a customer, you are, because guess what? You got to get those people paid. And also you're interested in putting that information back to get that into your finance systems from a GL perspective. You're interested in making sure you remain compliant in those organizations. So Payzaar can work with the global aggregators in different ways, and can augment what your global aggregator is doing and fill the gaps where they may not be particularly interested in filling, like countries with smaller populations, because guess what, they earn less there. So we could absolutely augment what the aggregator is doing. Part of our business model, interestingly, is a number of the industry players use our technology to sell their services on a global payroll model to their own customers. So in terms of our ability and technical capability to do that, we already have industry players using our technology to do exactly that.
Yeah, and just one example I would add to this. So for example, we have a global pharmaceutical company that has is spread across about 65 different countries, 20,000 employees. They have aggregators running their payroll operations in their different regional hubs, right? So in Europe, they have an aggregator that they put in place, in Latin America and APAC, each region run by different aggregators. And then they have some separate countries as well. which I think is increasingly becoming a common model where, organizations decide not to put all their eggs into one basket and work with just one global aggregator, but with multiple regional partners. And in this case, for example, we're helping this client, this pharmaceutical company, to aggregate all the data that they're getting out of the different aggregator networks in one central place, right? Because otherwise they still have to operate across 4, 5, 6, 10 different regional and, in some cases, point local solutions. And with Payzaar, we're just laying on top of these aggregators, pulling all the data together. We can help also with the integrations from the aggregators into their HR or finance system. So this is exactly the kind of plug and play type of scenario that Payzaar is very equipped to address. So I think we maybe have time for one more question, because I realize we've already gone a little bit over the top of the hour here. So I'm going to go to the one asked about, does Payzaar have the ability to operate or process shadow payrolls in a global mobility scenario? So effective deployment of mobility workers. Trevor, you want to?
Yeah, we do. In fact, one of our industry customers does exactly that for their customers. So shadow payroll, from our perspective, is just another payroll. It is being processed, and typically what you'll have is a payroll being processed in, let's call it the home country, and the shadow, and you have the payroll being processed in the host country. And from a Payzaar perspective, it's just another payroll. What's useful about it is the inputs for the shadow payroll, the outputs from the host country payroll to be able to process accurately there as well. So that data is available through that process to the customer and also to the provider.
Excellent. So look, I know there's a couple other questions that are out there that we are not able to get to right now. We'll follow up with folks that ask those questions separately. If you do have more questions following this webinar, you can see our contact information on this slides, and the recording will be shared. So please do reach out if this tickled your interest. If there's more things that you would like to learn about the plug and play platform as a service model that we described today, we're very happy to have further discussions with you and dig deeper into your specific situation and see how we can, potentially help you achieve your objectives in a less disruptive, faster, and smoother way. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the session, and please join us again soon with our next upcoming webinar.